Hello folks, I'm back in my green corner and coming to you from north side of town. Sorry I can't be with you today. I wanted to talk today about optimism. And so we'll start with the verse from Malachi. I am sending my messenger to prepare the way before me. And, you know, right there is, I would say, a message of hope, right? That that the Messiah is on the way, and that the way will be made, right? And I think in Scripture there are a lot of parallels, of course, to our everyday life, and so I find in this message today a message of hope. And in this time, it's been a tough couple of years here, and I'm going to riff a little bit on the theme of children, because you know, there's that song from gosh, I forget how it goes, but I believe the children are the future, and it really kind of resonates these days, you know, with things changing, the fact that the future is uncertain, and it will be our children that take that forward. And so I put together a little diagram, and I'm going to kind of come back to this. So to walk you through it a little bit, we have things that make sense in blue, and we have things that are true in purple here. And so there are some things that are true that don't make sense, like quantum entanglement and things like that. And there are things that make sense. To go back to physics, maybe you know, the Earth is flat. It seemed to make sense for thousands of years until we realized it wasn't, because somebody took the trouble to go far enough to find out it wasn't. And so I'm going to try to live a little bit in the middle here, but sometimes, you know, we'll be in these things that maybe don't make sense. Okay. And so, coming back to the message of the Scripture for today, and this notion of optimism, in that realm, that sometimes there are things that are true but don't make sense, and sometimes there are things that are true and do, but there are in the messages of God things that we do because He tells us to. And it's not in the sense of, you know, thou shalt. It's because it's in our best interest, right? And so if we look at a lot of the Scripture, it's to give us comfort and to give us hope. And in a way, it's God's way of telling us, you know, work out. It'll be okay. And however rough things may be, this too shall pass. And so maybe out of personal necessity, and maybe, you know, hopefully based a little bit on that thought and prayer, I would ask you to join me in this, to be optimistic looking forward. And so it's a conscious choice, as is being kind, and other acts of that I think are grounded in our faith that we express, and in that I think that metaphorically we also want to follow God's lead in terms of how we guide others, and then to consider, coming back to the children theme, what is their future? And I've been noodling this for a while. I kind of have some experience in the area with 5 kids, and Grace just now recently 5 and heading off to kindergarten next year. And so in that I saw a talk by a physicist, Clifford Stoll. He's a very frenetic speaker, scrawls his notes on his hands, but an excellent storyteller. He has an interest in many things. He was actually the first person to discover somebody hacking. And it was just kind of a by the way thing that a group of scientists were in the early days of computing collaborating, and there was some mysterious behavior, and he probed into that, and sure enough the Russians were trying to go and find out what sort of things we were researching in the US. But he makes Klein bottles as a hobby. It's kind of like a Moebius strip, but in another dimension. It talks about his PhD thesis in astrophysics, where one of the professors quizzed him on why is the sky blue, and it was a significant part of his PhD defense was explaining why the sky is blue. But in this particular talk, he was talking about this notion of predicting the future or looking into the future, and a lot of times people will ask smart people, well, what's going to happen in the future? And his response, I think, fit into that things that are true but may not make sense, because you have this very smart person and he says, I don't know the future, you shouldn't ask me. And if you ask any engineer or scientist what's in the future, they'll think about what they're working on at that time, and they'll say, well, that'll be the future. And he said, that's all right. He said, if you really want to know what the future is going to be, talk to a kindergarten teacher. They'll know, preferably an experienced one. And I thought, well, listen to that. That sounds like an interesting notion. But it's probably true that the people Grace's age, they will be the future. We'll be gone when they're forging the world in the way that makes sense to them, based on the experiences and the lives that they've had. And so the sort of person that you see coming through kindergarten, they will make that future. And kind of in that light, I think of all the many problems we have, and I look around and I see friends with children heading off to college, and these were, I'd say, one of the first generations in our country that they're having their experience of going in that transition off to university in kind of an after mode. I think of my there were a lot of things that of course happened in, let's say, my grandparents' lives, 2 world wars and their own pandemic. But relatively speaking, for my generation and my parents and the intervening ones, kind of the general contract and how things worked, but that's changed, and yet in this I see some of the most high achieving, brilliant young women and men that rather than I'm going to go off and make my millions and have a house bigger than my parents, they're interested in things like immigration law or environmental science or even literature or arts. They're casting this wider net, and they're finding value that goes. Not to say that there haven't always been artists and people in some of these things, but these brilliant minds are going and applying themselves in ways to make that future, and I find that really exciting. So I guess the next kind of notion on that I'd put is coming back to that role of a father and a child. Being a father to these children. I try sometimes to kind of think of the relationship of God to us as God the Father, of that role of what is best for my children, and trying to find that guidance and wisdom, but then enjoying, finding joy and finding just contentment in those those very same children finding their way to go and celebrate that journey that they go through. And so so let's come back to the theme today. We've got Christ on the way, and I want to return to the readings from Luke a little bit. And the child would be called the prophet of the Most High. So think about this: a child. This is referring to John the Baptist. And it was ordained, really, right, that this young child would precede Christ and pave the way for him. For you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people, to the forgiveness of their sins, through the tender mercy of your God, when the day shall dawn upon us from on high, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. So, pretty heavy burden for a child, but it's hopeful. It's this notion of overcoming the adversity, but overcoming this adversity with love, with forgiveness, and I find that to be a very powerful message. It's that kind of there's not a speck of malice in it. It's not retribution. It's if you go and you talk to the leader of the Freedom for the Israel front, or whatever it might have been in Jerusalem at the time, right? Their vision of Israel liberated from the Roman Empire certainly wouldn't have been one of forgiveness or peace. It would have been one of power and dominion, and rejecting the Romans by force, perhaps. And so I think that it's that kind of childish innocence, if we will, of going and looking at things hopefully, looking at things optimistically, and whatever might have been placed, as obstacles. If I think of the windows of opportunity for children today, yes, they're vast in many ways, but it's a little more scary than it was when I was a young person. And so with that, I think let's just take a look at the children around in the room, if there happen to be anywhere you are, and thank them, and cherish them. And as we prepare for the birth of Jesus, just know that the future is in the hands of the children and the child. Bless you all, and hopefully you're all well prepared for your Christmas holidays. Thanks.